Okay. So now I want you to look at exercise 3, communicate, on page 75. Just like we did for exercise 2B, I want you to practice with someone in your family, or you can practice on your own. Ask and answer questions about daily activities. So let's take a look at the example. What do you do every day, Emma? I study. What do you do before you study? I watch TV. What do you do after you study? I go to bed. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart underneath the conversation. So you can see Emma's name and the activities. So let's make some sentences. Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions, and I want you to make a complete sentence. The first one is, what does Emma do every day? So if you look at the conversation, then you'll see that I'm just using third person instead of second person. So what does Emma do every day? Okay, so we can just say Emma or she studies every day. So don't forget to use the third person form of the verb, third person singular. Okay, and then the second question, what does Emma do before she studies? What does Emma do before she studies? We know the answer is watch TV, but I want you to make a complete sentence and include the adverb clause. Okay, so we can say Emma watches TV before she studies. Emma watches, so you have to add es, watches TV before she studies. Okay, and then finally, what does Emma do after she studies? So the same thing, make a sentence and include the adverb clause. Okay, so we can say Emma goes to bed after she studies. So same thing, we have to add es, so Emma goes to bed after she studies. Of course, you can add the adverb clause at the beginning. So you can say after she studies, she goes to bed. After she studies, she goes to bed. Okay, so go ahead and take some time to practice with a partner or on your own. We're going to now look at our workbook on page 70, workbook page 70. So this is also lesson C, adverb clauses using before and after. Okay, so exercise 1, complete the sentences, use after. So you can see Manny's morning schedule. So let's take a look at number 1. Manny gets dressed after he wakes up. So if you remember from our students' book, the first activity is mentioned together with the after clause, and the second activity is mentioned together with the before clause. So that's what makes it confusing sometimes. So if you look at the first sentence, Manny gets dressed after he wakes up, we know that he wakes up is the first activity, and gets dressed is the second activity. Okay, so number 2, Manny eats breakfast after. Okay, so we can say after he gets dressed. So Manny eats breakfast after he gets dressed. Okay, so he gets dressed is the first activity and eats breakfast is the second activity. Okay, number 3, Manny works out after he eats breakfast. Okay, so eats breakfast is the first activity and works out is the second activity. Number 4, Manny takes a shower after he works out. Okay, so Manny takes a shower after he works out. Number 5, Manny goes to work after he takes a shower. Manny goes to work after he takes a shower. Okay, so again, the after clause includes the first activity. Also, if you remember, you can put the after clause in the beginning or at the end. So you can say, after Manny wakes up, he gets dressed. Okay, so let's do that for number 2. Go ahead. Okay, so we can say, after Manny gets dressed, he eats breakfast. Okay, number 3. After Manny eats breakfast, he works out. Number 4. After Manny works out, he takes a shower. Number 5. After Manny takes a shower, he goes to work. All right, so let's look at exercise 2. This time we are going to use before, and we have Janet's evening schedule. So let's take a look at number 1. Janet gets home before she eats dinner. So we include the second activity with the before clause. So that means Janet gets home first, and then she eats dinner. Okay, so I will give you some time to do numbers 2 through 4. Okay, so number 2, we can say, Janet eats dinner before she walks the dog. Or we can say, before Janet walks the dog, she eats dinner. Number 3, Janet walks the dog before she watches TV. Or, before Janet watches TV, she walks the dog. And number 4, Janet watches TV before she reads a book. Or we can say, before Janet reads a book, she watches TV. All right, so now let's look at page 71, exercise 3. Write questions, then write the answers, and use the information in exercises 1 and 2. So we are going to use Manny's morning schedule and Janet's evening schedule to make these questions and answers. So let's take a look at the first conversation. Number 1, what does Manny do before he eats breakfast? Okay, so if you look at the adverb clause, before he eats breakfast, that means that he eats breakfast is the second activity. Then what does he do first? So what does he do before he eats breakfast? Okay, and the answer is he gets dressed. Okay, and if you want to make a sentence that includes the adverb clause, you can say he gets dressed before he eats breakfast. Okay, so I'll give you some time to go ahead and do numbers 2 through 6. Okay, so let's look at number 2. What does Manny do before he works out? He eats breakfast, or he eats breakfast before he works out. Number 3. What does Manny do before he goes to work? Before he goes to work, he takes a shower. Or you can say he takes a shower, or he takes a shower before he goes to work. Number 4. What does Janet do after she gets home? She eats dinner, or she eats dinner after she gets home, or after she gets home, she eats dinner. So it's good to practice these various sentences so you don't get confused if you hear the adverb clause at the beginning or at the end, because people use both structures. Okay, number 5. What does Janet do after she watches TV? She reads a book, or she reads a book after she watches TV. Okay, and then number 6, what does Janet do after she reads a book? After she reads a book, she goes to bed. She goes to bed. Okay, so now let's move on to exercise 4. Underline the activity that happens first. Circle the activity that happens second. Okay, so let's look at the example. Number 1, I watch TV after I have dinner. So as I mentioned, so actually let me write this down. Okay, so it's easier to put this together. Okay. So as I mentioned, the after clause includes the first activity. So we can just put one here, or it says here, underline it. Underline what happens first. So after I have dinner. And then this is the main clause. So we're going to put number 2 here, or we're going to circle it. Okay, and then let's take a look at number 2 together. So this was number 1, number 2. Okay, so before Sandy goes to work, she buys a newspaper. Let's put the adverb clause together visually. So the before clause includes the second activity. So we can underline, oh no, I'm sorry, we can circle the second activity. And that means the main clause is the first activity. Okay, so before Sandy goes to work, she buys a newspaper. So she does this first, and then she goes to work. Okay, so for this activity, we're going to go ahead and do it together, but I will pause after each sentence so you can figure out which one is the first and which one is the second activity. Okay, so number 3. Ivana goes to school after she finishes work. Okay, so the first activity is she finishes work. The second activity is she goes to school. Okay, number 4. After Simon finishes his homework, he takes a break. Okay, so the first activity is finishes his homework, and the second activity is takes a break. Number 5. They usually go swimming after they go to the park. Okay, so the first activity is go to the park, and the second activity is go swimming. Number 6, before you go out, you need to take out the trash. Okay, so the first activity is take out the trash. And the second activity is go out. Number 7, Melanie puts on makeup after she takes a shower. Okay, so the first activity is she takes a shower. And the second activity is she puts on makeup. And number 8, Alan washes the dishes before he goes to bed. Okay, so Alan washes the dishes is the first activity, and then goes to bed, or he goes to bed, is the second activity. Okay, so now I want you to take some time to make opposite sentences. So instead of after, use before, or instead of before, use after. So for example, number 1, I watch TV after I have dinner. This time, instead of using after, use before. Before I watch TV, I have dinner. Okay? Or you can say, I have dinner before I watch TV. Okay, so I want you to do numbers 2 through 8. Okay, so number 2, we can say, Sandy goes to work after she buys a newspaper. Or after Sandy buys a newspaper, she goes to work. Number 3, before Ivana goes to school, she finishes work. Or Ivana finishes work before she goes to school. Number 4, before Simon takes a break, he finishes his homework. Or Simon finishes his homework before he takes a break. Number 5, before they go swimming, they go to the park. Or you can say, they go to the park before they go swimming. And I know the word usually is in the main clause, but it's a little unnatural to include usually in before or after clause. So you can take it out. Okay, so for number 6, you have to change the sentence a little bit for it to make sense. So you can say, after you take out the trash, you can go out. So instead of saying after you need to take out the trash, that's a little strange. It doesn't make sense. So you can just say after you take out the trash, you can, like you're allowed to go out. You can go out. So again, you can go out after you take out the trash. And then number 7, before Melanie puts on makeup, she takes a shower. Or Melanie takes a shower before she puts on makeup. And number 8, after Alan washes the dishes, he goes to bed. Or Alan goes to bed after he washes the dishes. All right, so we're going to move on to lesson D in your student's book. Okay, so lesson D, reading in your student's book on page 76. Page 76. Okay, so we are going to skip exercise 1 and just go straight to the story. I'm going to play the audio clip and then we'll look at the questions on the next page.
Page 76. Exercise 2.
Rules about time. Every culture has rules about time. These rules are usually unspoken, but everybody knows them. In some countries, such as the United States, England, and Canada, punctuality is an unspoken rule. It is important to be on time, especially in business. People usually arrive a little early for business appointments. Business meetings and personal appointments often have strict beginning and ending times. When you are late, other people might think you are rude, disorganized, or irresponsible. These countries also have cultural rules about time in social situations. For example, when an invitation for dinner says 6 p.m., it is impolite to arrive more than 5 or 10 minutes late. On the other hand, when the invitation is for a party from 6 to 8 or a reception from 3:30 to 5:30, you can arrive any time between those hours. For public events with specific starting times, movies, concerts, sports events, you should arrive a few minutes before the event begins. In fact, some theaters do not allow people to enter if they arrive after the event has started. Other cultures have different rules about time. In Brazil, it is not unusual for guests to arrive an hour or 2 after a social event begins. In the Philippines, it is not uncommon for people to miss scheduled events, a class, or an appointment to meet a friend at the airport. Many Filipinos believe that relationships with people are more important than keeping a schedule.
Okay, so let's look on page 77, exercise 3, after you read. All right, so exercise A, 3A, check your understanding. Number 1, what are unspoken rules? Okay, so if you look at the first paragraph in the story, you'll see every culture has rules about time. These rules are usually unspoken, but everybody knows them. So you might say that unspoken means not spoken. So the prefix un means not. As you know, as we've discussed before, un means not. Okay. So let me ask you, why do we have unspoken rules? Why are some things unspoken? Okay, so we might say they are already understood. People already know them. If you look at that paragraph again, it says, these rules are usually unspoken, but everybody knows them. So, you know, it's not necessary to state those rules because people already are aware or they already understand these rules. So For example, you don't have to say, make sure you don't come more than 10 minutes late. You don't have to say that every time you invite someone to an event. Of course, sometimes we do need to remind people, but in most cases, we don't have to say that because people already understand these unspoken rules about time.